Hello everyone and welcome to this session. Today I am going to talk about JIPMAT examination which was conducted pretty much recently. So this particular examination is conducted jointly by I.M. Jammu and I.M. Bodh Gaya for admission into their 5-year IPM program. So if anybody wants to study IPM program at I.M. Jammu or I.M. Bodh Gaya, they definitely need to appear for this entrance exam. Now, the feedback that we have received from several students of T.I.M.E is that the examination has been administered very smoothly and there were no technical glitches at any of the centers where our students wrote the exam. Now, the pattern of JIPMAT exam, let's understand it before I explain to you how this year's examination was. So, as far as JIPMAT is concerned, there are 100 questions in the paper and these questions they need to finish off in 2.5 hours duration. And every question in JIPMAT exam is given 4 marks weightage. And if you get it wrong, -1 would be carried out. So there is provision of negative marking. Definitely students should have been very careful so that they avoid negative marking. Now, as far as questions per section are concerned, there are 3 sections in JIPMAT exam. You have quantitative aptitude, which is nothing but mathematics. School level mathematics would be there. And 33 questions appeared from mathematics. Then data interpretation and logical reasoning also had 33 questions, whereas verbal ability and reading comprehension had 34 questions. That is why if you add it up, it becomes 100 questions. As I said, every question is having 4 marks weightage. So all in all, the total score possible is 400 in this examination. There are no sectional time limit, by the way, in this exam. So a student had the freedom to utilize the duration as per his or her convenience. Now let's look at section-wise analysis of the paper. Let's start with mathematics. So the mathematics section or quantitative aptitude section, it really tested the conceptual clarity of a student. Students who simply memorized the formulas would have struggled, but T.I.M.E students who would have attended classes on a regular basis would have surely benefited from the fact that the teaching was done from conceptual clarity point of view, and they would have found this section manageable. If the concepts were not clear, basics were not clear, the students would have struggled in this section. The mix of chapters was slightly different from last year, though not a huge difference, but slight difference was there. I'm going to share with you the breakup with regard to various chapters after some time. As I said earlier, student with basics clear would have found this section much more manageable than others. There were few questions which were pretty lengthy, and it would have been advisable for the student to either leave those questions or come back to those questions if time permitted, because they were time consuming as they involved a lot of calculations and working out. All in all, this section, in our opinion, was slightly more difficult than last year's quant section. And that is going to have an impact on the cutoffs also. I'm going to share with you the cutoffs after some time, but this definitely was one section which was slightly more difficult than last year. Now, this was the chapter-wise breakup. As you can see, a good number of questions appeared from topics like geometry, trigonometry, mensuration, where usually some of the students, they are a little weaker. So these topics would have surely tested the conceptual clarity of the candidate. So geometry, 2 to 3 questions appeared. Trigonometry also had a couple of questions. Mensuration had 2 to 3 questions. There were 2 to 3 ratios based questions. Permutation and combination question was there, and a couple of questions based on time and work, percentages, allegation, mixtures, simple interest, compound interest, linear equations, averages, profit and loss. All these topics had a couple of questions each. Some of these questions were time consuming. For instance, there was a question in geometry where really student had to ponder over it and spend considerable amount of time in order to get the answer. So they were time consuming questions also. The rest of the questions, of course, can be classified as miscellaneous. So this was one section that would have troubled most of the students in terms of difficulty level. Moving on to the second section of the paper, data interpretation and logical reasoning. Here you had a good mix of questions from a variety of chapters. And if you look at overall logical reasoning part of the section, logical reasoning and data interpretation section, You can probably say in this section, 5 questions can be classified as difficult ones, and 5 questions could have been classified as easy ones. The remaining could be classified as of moderate difficulty level. This was quite similar to how it was last year also. The chapter-wise breakup, there were a couple of questions on clocks. One of them dealt with faulty clock. There were a couple of coding and decoding questions which were pretty much straightforward. Blood relations questions were also there. People who had conceptual clarity, especially with regard to various blood relations and how to go about drawing a diagram, would have found this particular set pretty much doable. Series, there were 2 to 3 questions. Critical reasoning questions were there, 3 to 4 of them. One question was based on syllogism. There was another question based on strengthening and weakening of argument. There was one question based on assumptions and conclusions. So 3 to 4 critical reasoning questions were there. 2 to 3 analytical puzzle-based questions were there. There was one odd monad question which was pretty much straightforward. Seating arrangement question also appeared. Analogy-based questions were 2 to 3. So this is all based on the feedback that one has received from the students. That's the reason wherever they gave feedback like 2 to 3, we have mentioned 2 to 3. Then of course, there were also questions based on data interpretation. 7 of them appeared from DI. In fact, there were 3 sets where data interpretation questions were there. One set had 3 questions and the other 2 sets had 2 questions each. They were based on line chart, bar graph, and so on. There was one set based on tabular form of representation of data also. And these questions, you can probably say one set was marginally difficult, the other one was moderate, and then there was one which was very much straightforward. So the remaining questions, we can classify them as miscellaneous variety. All in all, I would say this section was very much doable. And in terms of difficulty level, it can be said it is on par with last year's DILR section. The final section, verbal ability and reading comprehension. Here, there were a good mix of questions. They were of moderate difficulty level. They were not difficult. They were of moderate difficulty level. And they had a good mix of straightforward questions as well as few tricky questions, inference-based questions. So let's look at the detailed breakup now. So there were 4 direct vocabulary-based questions which were essentially based on synonyms and antonyms. People who had worked on their vocabulary would have found them fairly manageable. There were a few questions based on grammar where passive to active, active to passive, voice and indirect speech-based questions were there. Apart from that, spelling of the candidate was also tested with a couple of questions. Common idioms and phrases were also used to create questions. Apart from that, you had phrase replacement, couple of questions, couple of fill in the blanks with standalone questions was there. There was error detection question which tested the grammatical skills of the students. Students of T.I.M.E who attended grammar classes would have surely found them very much doable. There was closed passage where 5 questions were based on one single paragraph, fill in the blank kind of questions were there. Apart from that, you also had one single reading comprehension passage with 3 individual questions after that. It was of moderate length and the difficulty level was slightly on the higher side because the questions were inference based. Apart from that, match the following questions. 3 of them were also there. And if you ask us overall how was the difficulty level, we will probably say it was very much similar to last year. But the student should have carefully picked up questions and they should have attempted questions, then it was very much manageable. So overall, if you look at it, Quant was one section which was more difficult than last year. The other 2 sections was quite similar to the previous year paper. Now, before I explain to you the cutoffs, let's understand one interesting thing about I.I.M. Jammu and I.I.M. Bodh Gaya. They want to have good diversity of students with regard to the gender. So what they do essentially is, I.I.M. Bodh Gaya, they start with absolutely no reservation for girls. They start with no reservation for girls and they see what is the merit list like. So when they do it this way, then 70% of the seats they try to fill up in a gender neutral manner without any advantage to girls. And then they see how many girls have come in that list when it was gender neutral, without any advantage to girls. If there is a good amount of representation by girls in that gender neutral list, then the remaining 30% seats are also converted to general neutral and there won't be any advantage to girls, right? But in case they believe that the first 70% seats when they are making up without any advantage to girls, if there is not enough representation by girls, then the remaining 30% seats are converted as special seats for girls, and there the cutoff for girls will fall. So last year, for example, when they carried out this process, they figured out that girl representation was not enough. So they had created the remaining 30% seats as seats for girls, and the cutoff for girls was reduced. All right. Now, same thing is done in I.I.M. Jammu also. The only difference is in I.I.M. Jammu, instead of 70%, they are making it 2/3. So first they make 2/3 of the seats as gender neutral and they will see whether there is fair representation by girls. If there is fair representation, then the remaining 1/3 seats are also made gender neutral. But if they believe that the enough representation by girls is not there in the 2/3 of the seats, then the remaining 1/3 will become seats for girls and the cutoff will fall. So last year, these were the official cutoffs in I.I.M. Bodh Gaya for gender neutral. That means for boys, essentially, the cutoff was 292. This is for the 70% seats. For the remaining 30% of the seats, the cutoff for general category girls, here I am talking about general category, was reduced to 282. So you can pause this video right now if you want to have a look at cutoffs for various category of students, reservation category of students. So these were the cutoffs that they kept officially. This year, it remains to be seen whether they will be gender neutral seats for everyone or they will have to create a lower cutoff for girls. Now, I.I.M. Jammu in their official document for this year has only mentioned the sectional cutoffs. Overall cutoff obviously will be decided afterwards. 50 percentile sectional cutoffs have been mentioned by I.I.M. Jammu. I.I.M. Bodh Gaya, by the way, keeps it as 30 percentile for general category, that is, and I.I.M. Jammu kept it as 50 percentile. Now, as far as the performance is concerned, overall performance of the candidate is concerned, for general category, we can probably say around 75 to 85 attempts in this paper can be classified as good number of attempts. Now, as far as estimated cutoffs are concerned, I have already shown you last year's cutoff. We believe this year the cutoff in I.I.M. Jammu as well as I.I.M. Bodh Gaya may slightly be lower than what it was last year, right? And of course, as far as girls are concerned, in case these I.I.Ms they decide to convert 30% and 33 1/3% respectively of the seats for girls, then the cutoff would be even lower for the female applicants. All right. So with this, I have come to the end of my analysis. If you like this content, do hit the like button and do share it with other friends and family members who might have appeared for JIPMAT exam, as they would also gain an insight about the examination. Thank you everyone for watching this video.